So Jesus, right, is born at a particular moment, and he steps into the story, and he gathers people around him, and they begin to tell a new story together, and a new order is born, and a new possibility is born, right? And a new love story is born. That's what we mean by a new order. A new order of love is born. So madly delighted to be with you, not on the road this week, right? To be in Easter time and to be in this holy holiday. And we're going to dedicate today, right? This great moment is going to be dedicated specifically to Easter. And next week, we're starting an entirely new dimension. We're going to be first talking about Barbara Marx Hubbard, right, which is going to be exciting and important. It's Barbara's yahrzeit, right? It's the anniversary of her passing, right, in this coming week. And so next week, I want to really go deeply into the beautiful Barbara space, number one. And we're going to be entering into next week this unimaginably important and critical part of the Dharma, which is outrageous love stories. So we've talked about outrageous love. We've talked about outrageous acts of love. And we've talked about outrageous acts of love that are a function of your unique self. We did an entire session on outrageous love letters, right? When I say this, how many people are tracking? People are really with us every week. And if you're new, welcome. This is a recapitulation of where we are and where we're going. But how many people are tracking, right? You can actually see, right, the movement here. Maybe we should do one more week in outrageous love letters. I'm not sure. Or maybe just, one more piece, I'll get advice from people, whether you think we should or not. But then we're going to go directly into outrageous love story. And then, we're going to go deeply into that. I'm going to start it actually today. I'm going to start a piece on outrageous love story in our intention setting that I'm about to do today. But just I want to kind of frame where we are with people, right? And the particular piece of Dharma that we're going to be looking into, right, is this unpacking of this understanding of reality as being animated by outrageous love. Now, that's not nothing. That's not a casual statement. That's not a new age statement. It's not a religious fundamentalist statement. What we're saying here, right, let me just get my camera in the right place so you don't have glare, everybody. Right, move myself over, right? What we're saying here at One Mountain, Many Paths is something I don't even have words. I don't know how to say it every week. I try and re-invoke it every week, but it's so pressing. It's so important, right? It's so source code changing. So when you think, wow, isn't that grandiose? Grandiosity, we're going to change the source code. People don't even realize there is a source code, but there is a source code. There's a source code, which is the framework which generates the entire system, right? The source code of the program on the computer generates all the applications. So all the applications of science and economics and business and law and psychology, right? And finance, right? And sociology and relationships and the way we do sports, right? And the way we do sexuality, all of those applications run on a source code. So all the applications of reality run on a source code. The source code is the inescapable frameworks in which we live. And they are the stories that we tell about reality and the first principles that we assume reality is based on. If you move to change the applications, you won't have enough firepower. But the way the applications are now running, they're driving us literally at breakneck speed into a brick wall. That's called the meta crisis. So the meta crisis is the first principles, the way they are now constituted in reality, are themselves already a form of artificial general intelligence, right? So there's this big, fear among the leading edge about what artificial intelligence could become and do. And I'm not going to go down that road now. We will have that conversation, right? And why is that a threat? Why is that an issue? Why is that not just people who don't understand artificial intelligence, et cetera? Why is that such a fundamental issue, right? Why is there a new ontology in Cosmos in which intelligence itself is generating more intelligence, right? In a ways that are dissociated from first principles and first values, and that will generate a reality in which there'll be a fundamental dehumanization, not because artificial intelligence is evil, but because it actually lacks interiors, right? And empathos, and it lacks a set of human values that would drive it in a certain direction. So bracket all that for a second. The best response, right, to this existential threat of artificial intelligence, right, and all the other existential threats, and really the only cogent response, is actually to evolve the source code. In other words, the applications running on the world system today are going to crash the system. The system will not be able to reboot, right? It's a world civilization that will fall like all the local civilizations did, but this time it's powered by exponential weaponized technologies, and the destruction wrought will not allow for an easy reboot at all. So we're talking about all of the unborn. We're talking about all of the future is at stake. You can't go up against the Death Star. Star Wars episode 6, the third movie made. Can't go up against the Death Star. It can't be done. Right? It's a Death Star. It's too colossal. Right? But there's an actual culture of death at play. And the culture of death is both the death of the individual, right, from attacks of the heart attacks and obesity and opioids and mental breakdowns, right, and suicides and lives cut short and in so many different ways, and just the death of spirit and the death of humanity, or the death of our humanity, those forms of existential risk. That's the Death Star. You can't, the applications that are running the Death Star are too powerful. They're too guarded. There's too much vested egoic structure. They can't be taken down. Can't be done. But what we can do is we can actually take down or change the source code itself that's powering all the applications. That can be done. That's what I've meant for the last decade, what Barbara has meant. When we talk about, right, this phrase, right, we want to evolve the source code of consciousness and culture. It's not a casual phrase. No. We understand the applications they're too invested. You can't stop them. The applications, their nature is, there's always going to be an update of the same application. Can't change. But what we can do is we can evolve the source code. We can evolve the source code itself. Now, to evolve the source code means telling a new story, articulating new first principles and first values. Put those two together, first principles and first values plus a new story, not a new story which is a conjecture, but a new story of intrinsic value. Put those together. So what we're saying is that to actually respond to the meta crisis, we need to tell of new first principles and first values embedded in a new story of value. Okay? And they can't be static. They've got to be evolving. You have to have evolving value which evolves. That's a whole conversation I'm not going to have now. We call that evolving perennialism, right? A new global understanding, a new global story of value rooted in first principles and first values, a story of an evolving perennialism. And that's the perennial, eternal, unchanging truths that are evolving. It's that paradox that holds reality, evolving value, evolving perennialism. That's the new story of value, evolving perennialism, which is not just principles, but principles rooted in a storyline, a plot line of value. Okay, that is the game today. That is the move, the change that changes everything. I spoke to someone this morning as I was dropping my son off for a game with his mom, and I spoke to someone who said, wow, that is so grandiose. It's so grandiose, right? This notion that you're going to change the lives of billions of people by evolving the source code. That's a grandiose notion. It's not grandiose. It actually is the core of, for example, the prophetic lineage. The prophetic lineage is be a light unto the nations, meaning tell a story that can become a world story that will allow, as history complexifies, that'll allow us to find our way and not actually end history, a kind of end of days destruction, but will allow the birth of a new world. It's what the great traditions called in by various names messianism, Messiah. But Messiah means a new world where Homo sapien, right, becomes Homo amor. We become omni-considerate for the sake of the whole. We can actually feel the whole. The whole lives in us and we live in the whole. We actually birth a new human and a new humanity, but not in a Marxist way. And not Marx who says, well, there's a false consciousness of capitalism. Let's birth a new human and a new humanity. Marx got that right, but he wanted to do it without first principles and first values, without individuality, without personhood, right? Without, right, irreducible uniqueness, right? So he tried to birth a new world order without first principles and first values. Disaster. We have to birth a new world order, right? Literally, right, which is what the traditions envisioned, all the traditions, that there'd be a moment in history in which we need to take a new momentous leap in the history of humanity. We're not going to just go on, and keep repeating ourselves. That actually what always is unchanging is that it will always change. The unchanging nature of reality is that change always happens. And there are moments of punctuated equilibria of momentous leaps, right? When the system is far from equilibria and it hovers on breakdown, actually a minor fluctuation point, right, in the system can jump it to a higher level of order, or a direct hit on the Death Star can actually explode the culture of death. That direct hit is the evolution of the source code. That's what we're talking about. Now, to evolve the source code, what we want to do is we want to integrate the best of the pre-modern, modern, and modern validated insights of wisdom. That includes religion. Religion can't be left out, which is why it's going to take us probably another 6 months, but we're actually updating the name of the center from the Center for Integral Wisdom to the Center for World Philosophy and Religion. And Kirsten Zohar, right, the editorial director and senior scholar at the center, is kind of leading, right, the articulation of that new website, Center for World Philosophy and Religion. And we wanted religion to be in the title. We can't do without religion. We need religion. We can't do a kind of human potential, liberal academic talking to each other out of America, let's change the world, which is narcissistic and self-involved. Actually, 70% of the world lives in an organized religion. We have to take religion seriously. And so we celebrate religion here at One Mountain, Many Paths, and we call it One Mountain, Many Paths. And this is the place, the seat of the revolution. This is the place where we're madly committed with radical audacity and trembling humility to actually come together as a band of beloveds, a band of, in the language of the lineages, a band of lovers, a band of what we call outrageous lovers, right? And articulate this new vision, tell this new story together, right? And this new story has to include the validated insights, not only of modernity and postmodernity, but actually of the traditional period. And so today is Easter. Today is Easter and today is Passover. And so today we want to integrate today Easter and Passover. We want to actually go into Easter and go into Passover and integrate, right, their most important, the most profound, their wildest insights. That's what we want to do today. That's a big deal. Okay, are we up for that? So I'm going to turn, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to turn to Jacqueline, who's going to resonate the code. And I want to maybe just say one more thing, as we're kind of setting our intention for today. And I know it's a big Easter day and people are at Easter dinners, but I just want to say, your being here at One Mountain makes One Mountain. No one should think that One Mountain doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to Krista. It doesn't belong to Jacqueline. It doesn't belong to Jamie. It doesn't belong to Christina Amelon. It doesn't belong to Shahati, right? It doesn't belong to Benjamin. It doesn't belong to Jamie. It belongs to us. And in our coming and our showing up and our animating this space and our breathing life into it and our breathing life into this revolution, right? Every single week, as we keep articulating this new story of value, we keep sharpening, right? We keep clarifying, we keep purifying. We keep rewriting, we keep editing, we keep adding chapters, we keep deepening, right? This is what we're doing. We are actually understanding that it's only a new story of value rooted in first principles and first values that actually evolves the source code, and we show up. We show up week after week, we show up. This is, I don't know, our 330th week, we show up. And we show up in our, right? We show up, right? Tom shows up and David shows up and, right, Claire shows up, we show up, right? Whether we're listening to a replay, whether we're here in person, right? We show up, right? Everyone thinks, and I just want to be just kind of a little bit tender, everybody, just a little sharp for a second. Everyone thinks it's just going to go on no matter what I do. That's not true. That's not true, right? We need each other. We need to do this together. We need all of our energy together, right, to make this happen, to make this alive. Right. And so I just want to thank everyone, today on Easter, right, where, so many of us decided, okay, we're going to show up today. We're going to be here today. We're going to tell this new story today. We're going to tell a wild new story today. A wild new story, right? The story of Passover, right, and the story of Easter together. That's what we're doing today. We're going to integrate the validated realizations and insights from that story, right, into the larger story of value, this new story of cosmoerotic humanism, this new story of value rooted in first principles and first values in response to the meta crisis. Easter and Passover get woven in today. So happy Easter, everyone. The Holy Trinity, Palm Sunday, Lent, right, all of it, right? Happy Passover, everyone, right? Oh my God, happy Passover, happy Pesach, which is the Hebrew name. And we turn to Lady Jacqueline, who's going to resonate our code, and in we go.
Thank you. This week's evolutionary love code. The holy trinity of cosmic pattern is order, disorder, higher order. Hope is in the knowing of this pattern. Hope is not a pollyannaish whimsy. Hope is the ontology of reality. Crucifixion is never the end. There is always resurrection. Resurrection is the ontology of Kosmos itself. Hope is a memory of the inevitable future. And with that, I hand it back to you, Dr. Marc.
Give it to us one more time, even a little slower. Give it to us one more time. Let's hear it again. Take it again. Let's take it. Is that okay, Lady JL? Let's hear it again.
Absolutely.
Here we go.
The holy trinity of cosmic pattern is order, disorder, higher order. Hope is in the knowing of this pattern. Hope is not a pollyannaish whimsy. Hope is the ontology of reality. The crucifixion is never the end. There is always resurrection. Resurrection is the ontology of Kosmos itself. Hope is a memory of the inevitable future. And back to you, Dr. Marc.
I love that code. Thank you, and resonated so beautifully. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Krista, for beginning us with such beautiful space, right? Thank you, Christina Amlon, for that gorgeous Dharma recapitulation, right? Thank you, Lady Jacqueline, right, for that just beautiful resonance of the code. Let's do this. Are we ready? Who's ready? Are we ready to play a larger game? Are we ready to play together, to dance in the orchard, and to have the privilege to be storytellers of reality? So are we ready? Are we ready to play a larger game? Are we ready to participate, quite literally, in the evolution of love, right, in telling this new story? Oh my God, here we go. Here we go. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Easter, happy Passovers. Let's start like this. So, and we're going to pray today. We're going to do the holy and the broken hallelujah. And I'm going to turn that to Krista at a certain moment. Even before, Krista, we do the prayer, we'll invite everyone just to be part, to join, right, to make this revolution is yours, is yours. It's your revolution. We are not a model which is led by, right, a powerful leader alone. Right? We have a lot of powerful leaders, right? I'm not without some energy, and Barbara Marx Hubbard was not without some energy, and my co-founder of the center, Ken Wilber, is not without energy, and Zach Stein, right, the co-president, and right, Kirsten Zohar and Christina Amelon, and right, as I can go down, Lady J, right, Krista, Josepha, Dr. Kincaid, right? Claire Molinare, right? There's a Howard Bloom, lots of people, right? But it's actually all of ours. Step in, make this yours. I mean, I can't say that more dramatically. Take your seat at the table of history. I said this to a dear close friend of mine 4 or 5 months ago, right? I said to her many, many times, who's just a dear, wonderful friend, and I'm waiting for that particular friend of mine to take her seat at the table of history because she is full of wisdom and aliveness, and we need her to take her seat, right? And from there, I started sharing that with other people. That's always what happens. Something comes up deeply in a Holy of Holies, and right, take your seat at the table of history. Take your seat at the table of history, right? Make this yours in a particular way. Get rid of the egoic structure. Figure out what that means. It could mean you're going to get involved in editing. It could be you're going to get involved in researching, right? Because we're writing a great library. Could be you're going to write a check. Could be you're going to become a member. You're going to get 5 other people to become members so you can resource. It could be you're going to volunteer time in creating, right, the mystery school. Could be you're going to come to the mystery school. Could be you're right. But in other words, make this yours, right? You know, this is yours. This is mine. This is ours. We are not spectators at this table. We are not in the stands. We are on the court. So from this on the court place, right? We're on the court. Okay. Here we are on the court. Here we go. So let's see if we can find this. Holy days. Holy days means that the sacred lives in time. So part of this new story of cosmorotic humanism, which responds to the meta crisis, is to begin to live the calendar. We actually need to create a new world religion calendar. Does that make sense, everyone? We need to begin to create a new world religion calendar, which has universal holy days. Within the context of that calendar, there can be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 religions. But there's got to be a shared calendar. We have a global reality, and there's got to be a shared global calendar which lives time together. So that the globe, we can do Ramadan here, and we can do Yom Kippur there, and we can do a Christian Easter over there, and we can do a Druid holiday, and we can have an Aboriginal holiday, and those are all beautiful. And we can't skip the Chinese New Year, right? And we need to have a shared calendar we live. So today we're in what's called Pascha, P-A-C-H-A, Pascha, Pascha, P-A-C-H-A. And Pascha means Passover. But Pascha is also, for example, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, Pascha is also the name for Easter. So Easter is called in Christianity, in much of Christianity, Pascha, 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 Pesach, which is the Hebrew for Passover. But Easter also is part of Pascha. It's part of, so there's one sense here. There's a larger complete holiday. We're not reducing Easter and Passover. They're actually quite distinct, but there are certain themes that each have, which you weave them together, are a critical part of the new story of value. So here's number one. The word Pesach means Pesach, the mouth that speaks. That's how Lurie in the 16th century, one of the great interior scientists, interprets it. Pesach is the mouth that speaks. And what does the mouth speak? The mouth tells a story. The actual lineage practice of these days is called telling the story of leaving Egypt. Telling the story of leaving Egypt. Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, telling the story of leaving Egypt. It's 2. Now 3, it gets dramatic. This notion of telling the story of leaving Egypt, this lineage structure, is not incidental. It's not once a year. It's not that once a year at the Passover Seder, Seder means order, the Passover Seder, which tells the order of reality, not that once a year we tell the story of leaving Egypt, but actually the entire Hebrew wisdom lineage, the entire thing, from beginning to end, revolves around a daily telling of the story of leaving Egypt. Why? So let's hear this and feel this on 2 levels. 1, it would be very easy to adopt a profoundly despair-suffused story of reality. For most of history, most people, I want to get this straight, for most of history, most people in most lives live in injustice. I mean, can we get that for a second? For most of human history, most people, most human lives live lives that are unjust. That's true. That are not free. That are filled with pain. And within their lifetime, there's not liberation, there's broken vessels and broken hearts and broken lives and broken bodies. And lest we dare forget the elite nature of our privilege that applies to probably virtually every person on this call, that's an elite privilege, the lives we lead. And that's why those lives demand something from us. They demand that we step in and that we act for the sake of history. But put that aside for a second. Let's just hold this reality just for a second. That's been the status quo of reality for much of history. Wow. It's a big deal. And along comes Passover. Along comes Pesach. And Pesach tells a different story. Pesach says that slaves should be free. Pesach says that freedom is a fundamental human dignity and right. Pesach says that the status quo is not unchanging, that the status quo needs to be changed and needs to be challenged. Pesach, the Exodus event, rejects the status quo. The Exodus event says that the infinity of intimacy, the divine voice, right, that suffuses Kosmos, that divine voice, Vayishma Elohim et nakatam, and God us heard their cries, the cries of the oppressed, the cries of the slave, and responds to them. That actually there's a divine force that lives in us, as us, and through us, and holds us, that acts and moves to transfigure history. That divinity is not beyond history. The divinity is not an eternal event. It's not an internal redemption. Right? Redemption, liberation is not merely an internal event. It has an interior dimension, but it's not merely an interior dimension. It's a political event, right? It's, excuse me, it's an economic event. And that was Marx's correct intuition, right? That got hijacked, that got terribly degraded. But his correct intuition was that the messianic idea, right, that liberation, that redemption is a political economic event. And we need to look and subject, right, this emergent capitalism in Manchester, England, and in other places where Marx and Engels were looking at it, to a very profound critique and actually usher in a new possibility. Now, he tried to do it without first principles and first values. There were a lot of, I'm bracketing that, but there was a basic understanding. There's this new possibility, excuse me, right, that has to emerge. Now, let's go even deeper. So there's an Exodus event, and that Exodus event says people need to be free. We can change the status quo. Reality cares. And I want to get that really, just to get this straight, right? Exodus says that reality cares. That's what this event's about. Reality cares, right? The quality of reality itself cares. I mean, that's a shocking realization. Reality is not neutral. Reality is not impartial. When I hear my friend Sam Harris and, what's her name? Popova, right? I think Maria, right? Who talks about an impartial universe. Reality is not fucking impartial. Reality is partial to love. Reality is partial to Eros. Reality is partial to justice. Reality is partial, right, to the cries of the oppressed and to the desperate agony of the needy, right? That's the nature of reality. It's like, wow, that's the Exodus event. Reality is partial to love. That's what we mean when we say, right, reality is a love story. Right? It's not an ordinary love story. It's an outrageous love story, meaning it's the inherent quality of reality itself. It's what Solomon means when he says in the Song of Solomon, Toho Ratzuf Ahava, its insides are aligned with love. Right? Like, wow. Okay, so that's starts there. So that's one. Now let's take it another step, okay? Now, the ontology of reality, this is deep and real. And let's go like all the way inside, okay? Let's go all the way inside, friends, okay? The ontology of reality is story. Now, there's a story you get caught in, right? The recursive loops, right? Of reviewing certain kind of personal life story again and again, right? And that becomes a kind of pseudo-eros that doesn't allow me to actually write the next chapter of a story. So it's correct that there's a story I need to move beyond. There's a part of the story, which is the ego gets me locked in the story in a way that I can't liberate myself from the recursive loops of the past. Okay, so that's true. That's important. However, now stay close, friends. I move beyond the narrow, coiled contraction of the recursive loops of the old story of yesterday, which I'm revisiting not in a way that constructs tomorrow, but in a way that keeps me locked in yesterday. So I need to transcend that. Then I go into the field, that's separate self. That's the pathology of separate self. Then I go into this larger field, this true self, which is beyond story. And I'm in the realm of being. But then after true self, after this beyond story and personal place, the impersonal comes back online and I return to the depth ontology of reality, which is story. I re-enter story. I reclaim the plot line of my story. I realize that story is not something I merely move beyond. And Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda, with all due respect, got it wrong when they said you leave story behind. He writes, like, I remember the day I left my personal history behind. You never leave your personal history behind. You leave the pathology of recursive loops of your personal history behind, but you then go to the wider field of the seamless code of the universe, true self, and then you emerge as your unique story, with the unique plot lines of your story, and you realize that your story matters, that your story is chapter and verse in the universal love story. Now let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. So that means that the invitation of reality is live your story, not move beyond your story, live your story. That's the book title. Live your story. Live your story. Does everyone get that? Live your story. But in order to live your story, stay close, you have to choose your story. And you have to choose the right story. Now, this is a big deal. Choosing the right story is a big deal. We know, I have a book here at someplace under my table, someplace, I don't know where it is. Oh, it's over there, right? By James Shapiro about evolution for the 21st century. James Shapiro is a top geneticist at the University of Chicago. And he has one chapter, quite complex, true scientific chapter, where he talks about basically the DNA code, right? Tells multiple stories, right? And then the receptor cells choose which DNA story that they're going to actually activate. Like, oh my God, right? So the DNA actually is telling multiple narratives at the same time. Does everyone get that? And he does. It's a very, I'm not going to do a deep scientific dive, but it's a brilliant chapter. The DNA is telling multiple stories, and then the receptor cells choose what story to tell. Okay. So now stay with me for a second. Okay. Have you ever heard of King Arthur's Round Table? Okay, we're looking for a table here at the center in Vermont. So Christina just told me yesterday, round table doesn't work. Okay, but we're looking for a great table because it all happens, friends, around the table. Okay, around the table. So King Arthur's Round Table. Now, friends, Romans and countrymen, right? Did King Arthur's Round Table work in the long term, even in the myth? No, it didn't. Why didn't it work? Because Mordred went and he took down King Arthur's kingdom. Didn't work. Let me ask you a question. Is anybody telling stories about Mordred? No one's telling stories about Mordred. We're telling stories about Avalon. We're telling stories about Camelot. Camelot. Right? And Camelot is the story we tell about King Arthur's vision of a round table, which is the goddess, the round, and about the devotion to the damsel, right? And the devotion, right, to the emergence of the feminine and the emergence of the noble masculine, right? And we put our swords, right, in service together, right? And we actually create a holistic hierarchy where everyone is playing their exact right role. Like, wow. And we actually create a unique self symphony together, right? The Knights of the Round Table are the first unique self symphony, right? And we have to actually be kings together, and we have to actually be in service and devotion, right, to this new possibility. Now in the end, the King Arthur vision didn't actually work, but the story worked, right? And the story inspires, and the story creates the next generation of knights, and it creates the next link in the chain of nobility, and in the chain of rapture, and in the chain of service, and in the chain of wild and gorgeous knighthood. Right? So Mordred historically won, but the story is King Arthur. So it's what story we tell. I'll give you just a second example. It's a great example. Right? This is another thing in the Hebrew wisdom lineage. You may remember a few months ago, we mentioned Hanukkah, right? The 8-day holiday of Hanukkah, when the Hebrews, the Jews, fought the Greek Seleucids. So I'll give you the bad news. We lost the fucking war. And again, I apologize. I've used the expletive deleted F word twice, which I promised I would not do. So I apologize. I'm going to take both of those back. I've got a deal with one of my friends. So I apologize. Back to normal, appropriate censorship. Okay. Apologies. I got a little carried away. Okay. So stay with me, Oriana. Apologies. Okay. But stay with me. It just to get it. We lost the war. The Hanukkah story, they lost the war. The Greek Seleucids won. 25 years later, the Greek Seleucids won. There was this one little moment when it was beautiful, and it was Camelot. When they came back to Jerusalem, and they reconsecrated the temple, and there was a miracle. Right? The light that was supposed to last for 1 day lasts for 8 days. There was a miracle. But here's the thing. When was the last time that you saw someone telling a story about the Greek Seleucid Empire 150 years before the Common Era? No one's talking about the Greek Seleucids. It's a tradition that died, and yet the tradition of the Hebrews is alive. Why? Because they're telling the story of the partial victory. Life is filled with partial victories. There are no absolute victories in life, my friends. In the world of samsara, there are no absolute victories, but there are partial victories. There are celebrations, and we can live the dream, and we can celebrate even amidst the tragedy. Even as I'm living in tragedy day in and day out, I can claim my second innocence, and I can live the dream. And I can be part of the new story, and I can tell the new story, and I can take my seat at the table of history, and I can give my unique gift and my unique circle of intimacy and influence. And I do not need, right, to cry tears of resignation. I can cry tears of ecstasy. I can cry tears of pain. I can cry tears of shattering, right? I can cry tears of agony. I can cry tears of joy, but I don't cry tears of resignation. I don't throw in the towel. I don't give up. I don't step off the court. Yet I'm not on the stands. I'm on the court. I'm in the game, right? That's Hanukkah. It's the story that we decide to tell. Everything is about the story we decide to tell. Now stay close, stay close. It gets a little crazy here, gets a little wild. I don't step off the court. It gets a little wild. Postmodernity got this insight, but in its pathological form. Does everyone stay with me? Is everyone up for a second? Postmodernity, what does postmodernity say? Postmodernity says, A, there's no field of value, doesn't exist. Field of value doesn't exist, right? There's no Tao. Postmodernity says, there is no Tao, we're not in the Tao. Tao, the way I'm translating the Tao is as the field of value, okay? One, now stay close, stay close. Therefore, says postmodernity, all that's left is story. And then empire, right? The pathology, right, of a win-lose metrics reality, let's call it empire, then chooses the story to tell. The stories with the victors. And so story itself becomes a made-up mechanism served up by the victors. Story becomes propaganda. Story is reduced to propaganda. No, but story is not just propaganda. Do you understand? Story is not just owned by empire, right? Story is the ontology of reality. So postmodernity he said, oh, it's all about the story you decide to tell. But postmodernity said, you're making it up. And it's not true. And the only thing left we have is the story we tell, but that story is just made up. And my friend Yuval Harari writes this all over the place. All the stories are made up, so might as well tell a good story. My friend Werner Erhard, right? And I spoke to Werner about this deeply. So it's about the story you decide to tell. He doesn't use that language, but it's about the meaning you decide to create, right? None of the other stuff worked, so make meaning that seems to work for you, but none of it's real. None of it's intrinsic. No, that's not right. Story is the structure of reality. Story matters, right? God loves stories in the language of lineage, or in the language of our new cosmologic humanism. Story itself is the first principle and the first value of cosmos. But reality is written in stories. It's not something we impose on reality. We're not imposing story on reality. We're not imposing story on a value neutral reality, which is desiccated from meaning and desiccated from narrative. No, story is the nature of reality. Does everyone get that? So the story that I choose to tell is not a made up. Oh, I'm not going to tell a victim story. I'm going to tell a player story, because isn't that a good methodology? They both aren't really true. So might as well tell one that works. No, actually, there is the highest, deepest, and best story, right? Which is the one that's most inspiring and most constructive and most generative of goodness, truth, and beauty. Most takes me out of my narcissism and allows me to be in service. But the story that blows my heart open, the story that makes me dance, the story that makes me sing, the story that makes me make love, the story that arouses me, the story that causes me to throb and pulse as part of this living reality, the story that fills me with gratitude and delight and ecstasy every moment of every day. Right? Not in a Pollyannish way, not that I turn away from the pain, not that I turn away from the suffering, but I live, right, in the utter beauty of the story that I've chosen to tell, which is the deepest ontology of cosmos that I'm able to grasp. And it's a love story. It's got agony and it's got ecstasy. But my friends, it actually is a love story, because reality, its ontology, is a love story. It's actually true that its insides are aligned with love. It's not made up, right? From quarks, right, to atoms, to molecules, to macromolecules, to cells, to multicellular structures. The whole freaking thing is a love story, all the way up and all the way down. That's actually true. And my story is a love story. And it might be a freaking agonizing love story, but it's a love story. And my commitment, right, to my son is a love story. The commitment of the father to the son, of the mother to the son, it's a love story, right? And you can never let one love story exhaust you. You can't get exhausted in one love story. We've got to all live multiple love stories. We all have to be polyamorous. Right? Polyamorous means we got to live more than one love story. So if you're only living one love story, if your love story is dependent on one person, doesn't matter whether it's a wife, daughter, husband, sister, grandfather. If you let one love story define you, then you've made that story idolatry. That love story lives in this larger frame of love stories, right? Our love lists are too short. Our list of love stories is too short. We live in a series of love stories. That's what life is. Life is a series of love stories. That's what it is. And sometimes, right, it's not a one night stand. Sometimes it's a 3-minute stand. It's a 1-minute stand, right? So I was in Austin, right, with Christina, and we had to kind of get out of the house to get some food, right, at a particular moment. And right, there was a particular waiter, right, who came to our table, right, and he looked sad. And we had this like 60-second incredible exchange, right? It was right, complete ecstatic, right? We just made love in that moment. Our eyes locked. We exchanged. Maybe it was 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most. Love story. Love story. And he's going to tell that story. That waiter is going to tell that story to everybody. It was so beautiful, such a beautiful 3 minutes. I'm not even going to tell you the story now. But it was such a beautiful 3-minute exchange. We found each other, and you just like the whole world just opened up. So instead of being a waiter whose name we didn't know, came a love story. It's all a love story. So what story do I choose to tell is everything, but it's not everything in a postmodern way. I'm going to make up a story and just choose one as an arbitrary act which has no meaning and no significance. So I might as well choose a good one. No, it ultimately matters. I am lived by my love story. My love story is the source code of my life. Now, here's what Easter says. Here's what Easter says. You ready? Here's what Easter says. Right? Here's what Easter says. The story never ends with crucifixion. Easter says there's a basic pattern of reality, and the pattern of reality is hope. Hope is not pollyannaish. Hope is not a whimsy. Hope is a structure of reality itself. The pattern of reality is order, disorder, higher order. That's the pattern of reality. Order, disorder, higher order. So Jesus, right, is born at a particular moment, and he steps into the story, and he gathers people around him, and they begin to tell a new story together, and a new order is born, and a new possibility is born, right? And a new love story is born. That's what we mean by a new order of love is born. Right? What Whitehead called the creative advance of novelty, that love emerges, that love evolves. That's what we call here the evolution of love. It's not a slogan, it's the structure of reality. And the evolution of love is the source of hope. Reality is radically hopeful ontologically in its very nature. So there's this new order, it's the Christ order. And then that order is challenged. That order is crucified. That order is attacked. And that order does not have the possibility, just does not have the possibility of responding. Right? And we have much of that today. We have much of that today where we have a kind of social media world where people assume what's written on the internet is true. But often what's written on the internet is a set of captured interests, right? In structures. For example, Wikipedia is a great example. Living person pages in Wikipedia are an absolute disaster, right? They're filled with, rife with disinformation, right? Put up there by essentially captured editors who captured the pages, often 15, 20 years, right? And they kind of capture and own a page. So you live in that place. Wow, right? They're telling a story about me that's not true, right? I've met dozens and dozens of people, but in public life who are just devastated by why they're telling the story about me that's not true. Like crucifixion. No, but then you go to resurrection. Crucifixion, right? I've gotten shattered by life. Crucifixion, my vessels have been broken. Crucifixion, I've been dealt an impossible hand that there's no way I can play without collapsing and giving up my joy and giving up my lovemaking, right? And giving up, right, the quivering tenderness and the trembling, right, of ecstatic aliveness, which is self-evidently good, true, and beautiful. No, there's always resurrection. Spring always comes after winter, as above, so below. The Corpus Hermeticum, translated by Marcello Ficino at the Plato, right, Academy of Florence, right? The great Hermetic tradition, echoed in the Talmudic tradition, as above, so below. Said in our terminology, as interiors, so are exteriors. As exteriors, so are interiors. Insides and outsides mirror each other. Spring always comes after summer. Hope is an ontology of cosmos. We reject the status quo. Hopelessness is not the nature of reality. Human beings deserve to be free, and human beings will be free, right? And a higher order will always emerge from the disorder. She comes in threes. And the third is always the higher order. It's always the new possibility. And sometimes it comes and it shows itself and it disappears. So we celebrate, we tell the story of the moment that it showed itself, because it was actually the evolution of love struggling to emerge, but it couldn't yet attain a stable center of gravity. So what we do as the ultimate revolutionary subversive act, this is a subversive act of the revolutionary, is we tell the story of the new higher order. That's what we do. We don't tell the story of the Greek Seleucids in the Hanukkah story. We don't tell the story of Mordred or in the Round Table story. We tell the story of the higher order. There was that moment where spring, the first buds of spring, right, emerged, and then there was another winter, but that's okay. We saw those first buds of spring, and we know that they're true. We know that they're good, and we know that they're beautiful. And our hope is rooted, right, in the nature, right, of reality itself. reality is, and I want to go just one last step, okay? One last step, and let's just find this one last step. So you'll tell me, okay, but the crucifixion itself, right, followed by resurrection, okay, so now you've talked about the structure of history, Mark, right? That, okay, so God, that's great. But there wasn't an actual resurrection, was there? Well, maybe there was. Maybe there was. Let's just stay with that possibility for a second. Why are we convinced that there wasn't an actual resurrection? Okay, now you're going to say, oh my God, Mark has now been revealed. He's been hiding it. He's a fundamentalist. No, I'm not a fundamentalist. I'm not in any sense. I grew up deep in a lineage, and I've struggled my whole life to actually create a new lineage, which is beyond fundamentalism. But actually, if you look at reality seriously, what do we actually know? Let's just be serious for a second. I don't know whether Jesus was resurrected in this historical story. I don't know. Don't know. But would I dismiss it as a possibility? I would have to be a blithering idiot, right? And I'd have to be a fundamentalist to dismiss it. Why? Well, really simple. It's really simple. We actually know in the last 140 years, right, we actually have an enormous amount of information, which began with Edith and I think Henry Sedgwick at Cambridge, who started the British Psychical Society. Then they wrote their friend William James in Boston, who started kind of the Harvard Psychical Society, which began to track information, right, on events, empirical events in reality that were not accounted for by the laws, the classical laws of physics and biology. Now, the laws of physics and biology are real, but it's also very, very clear empirically. If you're not a selective empiricist, most of contemporary science, which is very important, I'm a mad reader of the sciences. I'm in devotion to the sciences, and anyone who knows me knows that. But much of science today, right, not in its science form, but it's in a dogmatic form, are not empirical. I mean, they don't actually take account of the data. Science is selectively empirical. It takes account of the data that matches, right, the conclusion it's seeking to draw. And particularly that conclusion is often a reductionist materialist. That reality is empty of structures of meaning, and the only way that connections happen, right, is through, right, the classical laws of physics. But of course, this past year's Nobel Prize went to research in non-local connection. And we're now realizing more and more deeply, right, that actually there are many invisible lines of connection. There are invisible lines of connection that actually are woven throughout all of reality, and that actually we can't account for empirical reality without realizing that there's a structure of consciousness that creates intimacies all through reality, number one. And number two, until we realize that death is not the end of the story. Death within one lifetime is not the end of the story. You cannot live your story within the context of one lifetime. It doesn't work. This lifetime is a chapter in the story. It's a chapter in the story. And if you try and work out your lifetime, right, to be happy, right, within one lifetime, it's not going to work. How about being fulfilled, being aligned with value, right, giving your unique gift within one lifetime, then as a byproduct of being aligned with value, of being aligned with the higher plot lines of reality that live in you, as a byproduct of giving your unique gift, right, living your unique self, you're also going to attain a degree of happiness, the highest degree of happiness and joy you could possibly attain, because joy is a byproduct of living your unique self. But your storyline is never exhausted in the context of one lifetime. It's not true. It's just not true. Right? We have to actually extend the storyline. Right? This lifetime is one chapter, right, in a larger, evolving, right, almost never-ending story. And that story is evolving, and it has direction, and it's got telos, and it's got eros. It's a telerotic story, and it's moving towards the evolution of love. Right? And my life has got order, and then it's got disorder. It's moving towards a higher order. That's the direction of reality. And if I can get out of my temporal myopia, right, where I'm living in this minute, and enlightenment is to kind of feel the larger field and move for everything in this world, right? We move to create heaven on earth. We don't wait for the next lifetime. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that this story, this movement to create heaven on earth, right, is living in the context of a larger story. Of course it is. How do we know? Because we know that justice is a given. And we know that justice is at a first principle and first value of reality. And most people don't achieve justice in one lifetime. And so therefore, we actually know in our very ontological existence in our very bodies, through my body, I vision God, that the story must go on. Because the story is always a story of justice. It's always a story of goodness, truth, and beauty. But that's not achieved by millions, even billions of people in one lifetime. So there's a continuity of consciousness. Notwithstanding that the empirical evidence at this point, in the last 140 years, gathered by the British and an American Psychical Society, actually indicates that there's continuity of consciousness. So what does Easter say? Easter says no to death. Easter says death is not the end of the story. Easter says crucifixion's not the end of the story. There's resurrection. Now, does resurrection happen 3 days later? Maybe. I'm in. Maybe not. Maybe it's a historical myth. But is resurrection true? Absolutely. Absolutely. Without question, resurrection's true. Resurrection is a truth of reality. Right? It does not end with crucifixion. Hope is a memory of an inevitable future. Wow. That's the story we're going to tell. You see, that's the story we're choosing to tell. Does everyone begin to feel, friends, how this all comes together? We're choosing to tell that story, not because it's a fanciful story, not because we're making it up, not because it's a conjecture, not because my dear friend Yuval, brother, what are you saying? Not because, as you write in Sapiens, because stories are fiction, we're just making it up, not because stories are a figment of our imagination, right? Not because story is just a mere social construct. No, story is the ontology of God. Story is the ontology of reality. And the story, when we put together the best information, when we tell the most accurate story, that story births the evolution of love. So the story, what are we doing here together? We're at this moment of meta-crisis, and we've come together to tell a new story of value. This is a Da Vinci moment. We're convening, and Medici's come forward, right, and resource this, right? But let's resource this, but we're telling a new story of value. It's the single most important thing we could do at this moment in history. It's the overwhelming moral imperative of this moment in history, is not to tell a new age story, not to tell a regressive Pollyannish story, but to tell the most accurate story, the most accurate love story that we can tell, grounded in all of the sciences, integrated right into a plot line which becomes self-evidently clear, that actually lives in us, as us, and through us. Wow, I'm just going to finish with one thing. Have you ever noticed, friends, that there's music in reality? Anyone ever noticed there's music? I love music. Oh my God. And music is reality seeking to tell its story. And music has lyrics. Lyrics is we're trying to give words to the story. And sometimes the lyrics are purely poetic, but usually they're not. Usually they're telling a story. Most lyrics tell a story. Isn't that interesting? Most music has lyrics, and most lyrics tell a story. And almost every story is a love story. Wow. Across culture and time, almost every story is a love story. Sometimes it's love of the beloved, the woman, the man. Sometimes it's love of country. Sometimes it's love of God and all her distressing disguises. Sometimes it's love of the earth. Sometimes it's love of truth. Sometimes it's love of beauty. But it's love. It's always a love story. Why? Because reality is not merely a fact. Reality is a story. And reality is not an ordinary story. Reality is a love story infused with hope. Hope is a memory of tomorrow's never-ending love story.